Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. And it's time to talk about Final Fantasy. It's not 13, it's not 13-2, it's not 14. We're going back to the old school. Not to the Final Fantasy Origins, but to the second one. To Final Fantasy 2.
God damn it.
And it's time for Final Fantasy Too Bad. Which means
fuck, is that what you're going to call the podcast?
It's Final Fantasy Too Bad.
I would just like to say, for the record, that for about a year now I've been lobbying to call this Final Fantasy II The Call of Kawazu. But
I'll write up one. I'm only going to write 2 blogs about this game because it doesn't deserve my time and effort for like a 5-part series.
Fair enough.
Fair.
I promise you, the first episode will be called The Call of Kawazu.
That's fair.
But something in parentheses claiming that this is probably the worst game I've ever played.
We'll get to that. But before we get to the quality or lack thereof of Final Fantasy II, first, introductions. Since I'm hurting myself with Final Fantasy again, I'm joined, as always, by my co-conspirator, Chris ZombiePie Redacted.
People tried to tell me that there are good Final Fantasy games, yet we continue to find a way to not play them.
We had an option. I said we can do 14 or we can do 2.
Admittedly, yes, it was my idea to play 2.
Yeah, I wanted to play 14. It was in the Zeitgeist, Shadow Lords or Shadowbringer. The newest expansion had just come out. It was in the Zeitgeist. I had people who were getting into it. I could have jumped right in, but you were like, "Nah, dog.
Let's go raw. Let's jump into it.
Let's roll in the muck.
Let's understand our history."
And we also have a second voice that you may have heard.
May recall.
Yes, and you may recall from earlier shows and from the Giant Bomb Community Endurance Run if you watched. And he is going to be our guide.
It's Shrek!
Yes.
Oh, hey, Shrek. Speak some Norwegian to me.
I'm not allowed to make Shrek noises because my partner's in this room right now doing homework. She'll become very cross.
You speak some Norwegian? Is it Norwegian time?
I am going to make a specific sound, though. Let's see if the users can recognize this sound. That's the sound of a Modelo opening, because, boy.
Hey, if we're gentlemen, this is my fault. So, Gino, from the bottom of my heart, I've tried and tested our friendship on multiple occasions. I accidentally made you play pornography at one point, and we still got through it.
That was a bad goof you made.
I've made you play some poor Final Fantasy games as well as other poor computer role-playing games, even though I continue to...
I still haven't introduced Jeff. Can I introduce Jeff?
Sure. I forgot. I thought you did.
I didn't. That other voice you hear is Jeff, our guide to the land of Kawazu and the madness therein. Jeff Rude. Hello.
So, to return to my point, Gino,
yes,
I owe you something. I should do something for you that I've been promising that I would do. So, you hear that?
I hear noises. I hear crinkly noises.
And Jeff will also support this endeavor.
Will I?
I'm going to do something, because whenever Jeff is on the podcast and we record one of these classic Final Fantasy games, usually there's at least one food review.
Oh, boy.
Is there?
But this time I've done something that Gino has asked me to do for quite some time, and I've promised him, because I've done some mean things to Gino, I have decided to buy an Impossible Burger.
I was going to say, I think that this is an Impossible Burger. Is this from Burger King?
Yes, it is. Which, recently, Burger King's Impossible Burger has been in the headlines as not being the best version of this.
No, it almost certainly won't be.
But
anything is usually not the best version of whatever they're making.
Admittedly, I have not had a vegetable burger for ever. I tried some of the Boca
That's a shame.
burgers.
They're good.
And I hated the Boca burgers because they had like corn and like were just full of cumin and they ripped up my stomach.
They're
Okay,
not
I'm
the
not
best.
all about that cumin.
Without further ado,
Let me bite into
bite
this.
into it.
Do it. Make me proud.
Oh.
It's the sounds he makes.
That's a good sound. That's not a. That's.
He's not retching.
Yep.
Huh. All right, I'm going to bite into the patty with none of the vegetables.
But I got to give Burger King credit. They gave me a decent amount of mayonnaise, ketchup, pickles, onions, and lettuce. So the texture is solid.
The filler ingredients they hooked you up on. You're saying?
Huh. So it doesn't taste like meat, but it doesn't taste like what I'm used to with a vegetable burger.
No, it's closer to meat
It's closer to meat.
than
But-
veggie burgers.
Now, is the Impossible Burger the one that's got the I guess what am I looking for? Vegetable based kind of hemoglobin
It's got
stuff.
heme. Yeah,
in?
it's got that
Okay.
heme in there.
Okay.
It will taste like blood because there's iron in there.
Yeah.
Huh.
I have yet to have the Burger King version of the Impossible Burger, but I've had a Beyond one, and I think I've had an Impossible Burger at some point as well. I think
Yeah,
they're both okay.
I prefer the Beyond personally because it doesn't
Yeah.
taste quite so much like regular meat. It's got a little bit more flavor, whereas I
Yeah.
find that the Impossible Burger tastes a good amount like ground beef. And I don't find ground beef without a lot of seasoning or spices to taste especially good to begin with. So reproducing it doesn't entice me as much as someone who says, beef, we can do better than beef.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I've never understood is like the attempt to emulate the meat experience. I feel like the vegetarian food I've enjoyed the most, the health food I've enjoyed the most, is just good vegetables or
Word.
like
it doesn't take a lot
salads.
of work.
So ZP, how is it? What do you think?
That was decent. That was above decent. I think the only thing, me being a nightmare person, it was $6 for this burger.
And this is bad. This is a bad price.
This is a poor price for this burger in comparison to the fact that Burger King has a value menu and like multiple burgers that you can get even fries and a drink for that price. That said, it's good. Will I ever go out of my way to buy one? Probably not.
What if I told you it's helping the planet slightly? Just ever so slightly. All right, the silence says everything. Okay, so
Nihilist.
without further ado, let's turn our attentions to the Final Fantasy.
Joe Johnson, Big Three.
Nope. Before we do that, just a reminder, this show is Patreon supported. So you can go to patreon.com/deeplistens and support the show. And that helps us put this show on every week. It helps cover our hosting costs and our game costs because we don't get these games for free. We buy them. So it would be nice if you can chip in. You gain access to our Discord, our community Discord, which is very active. And you can chat with the hosts. You get exclusive content, some insight onto what games we're playing, what we're thinking as we're going. You get access
Good
to the
food
lesson
advice.
plans of the shows in advance. So yeah, check it out. And
Nice
you can also,
discussions about pizza.
there are discussions about pizza. I can't speak to their quality. And we also have feedback mechanisms. You can get in touch. You can send in feedback at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment sections and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. You can write in. So now we turn our lonely eyes to Final Fantasy II.
All right.
Jeff
So
or ZP, either of you, who wants to explain what a Final Fantasy II is?
I can, I guess, talk a little bit about
yeah, go.
this. I don't have the actual notes. I didn't take a lot of notes. I'll preface all this by saying I beat this game 3 months ago and have not thought a lot of it since because spoilers. I don't think it's particularly good. But
And you warned us. You warned us multiple times.
I'd like to think I did, but in summary, okay, so Japan, 1987, Final Fantasy I comes out, sort of as a conversation piece against Dragon Quest 2 at that point. And it's a JRPG. It's got sort of a light class system. I think the most noteworthy thing about Final Fantasy 1 at the time was it had pretty good art and aesthetics, for lack of a better word.
Pretty good music.
Yeah, like there are things you can cull from the original Final Fantasy game as it appeared in '87 and be like, yeah, like there's legs. This may be a series that's interesting. Out there, so Hironobu Sakaguchi directed that game. There's an individual, the Gooch, assisted by it was not the work of a sole author. You've got Uematsu doing the music, you've got Yoshitaka Amano doing like the cool line art, and then you've got this guy who does design work within Square, and his name is Akitoshi Kawazu. So, I used to kind of be associated with another website called Hardcore Gaming 101, and there's a running theory about Kawazu that he's actually a brain in a jar somewhere in the Square offices in Japan, and they basically just like, he's like, I'm thinking about working on a coloring book, and they're just like, that's great, here's $20,000, just stay in the basement, work on your coloring book, and that's good. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. You just stay in the basement. You just stay down there. Don't talk to the rest of us. Because he's a lunatic. He's just out of his goddamn mind. But, apparently someone owes him money or something, so they leave him on the payroll. So
he had tenure. He's a tenured game developer.
Yes. Also, there's that.
This guy also
thing.
Gets his ideas approved, and somehow they keep getting through Q&A and playtesting.
Yeah,
but to be fair, this was the second Final Fantasy game. They didn't know what they were doing quite yet. So the idea that someone who has a vision and is a smooth talker, maybe has some position in the company and so contributed to the first game, the idea of giving them a crack at a game, not that out of the question, especially for a company that at Squaresoft's state in 1987, 88, they were not a very healthy company. They were clinging on.
They're basically getting their asses handed to themselves by their future partner Enix, who has been belting out classic Dragon Quest game after classic Dragon Quest game, and then also getting their lunch eaten by the various studios of computer role-playing games, such as the Wizardry franchise. You've got
at this time
SNS, SSI. You've got all of these games that are coming out that are also very solid.
To be fair, though, at this time, the console and PC markets were two distinct markets, especially in Japan versus the rest of the world. Japan was not a very early adopter of the PC. So
even then, these games where those influences pretty much... I'm sorry.
There was a pretty thriving Japanese personal computers. So
Gino.
maybe not at the scale of the
Wizardry
United States.
Is now owned by a Japanese company. They bought it because of how beloved that franchise is in Japan.
Yeah, you've got like a very... what would I call it? Mercantilistic approach to the PC market in Japan that's dominated by domestic companies like Fujitsu and Sharp, with like very Japan-specific SKUs.
8600 or whatever that console was.
68,000, which is a dream.
68,000.
You've got the entire PC line from NEC. You've got the MSX computer standard, which becomes kind of a standard in like the Soviet bloc and the Middle East on top of everything else. But so, like, Final Fantasy got ported to the MSX, reasonably, within, I think, a year of it coming out. So I'd push back on that a little bit, but it is fair to say that there is some, split between those two. Like, you get some novel stuff like Ultima gets a Famicom port. Ultima 4 gets a Master System port that winds up...
There was an NES Might and Magic game that was actually decent.
Like the Black Onyx got ported to the SG-1000. It was like the last game that came out for it, which is a Western developed computer RPG that no one remembers because it's not very good. But yeah, so there's Final Square as a company is kind of on the ropes and Final Fantasy save them, blah, blah, blah kind of story. The other, I guess, chunk of the Kawazu part of this that I think is pertinent is that it was the second game in a series, and there's kind of a trend of late 80s sort of like sequels, like the second entry into numerous series, mostly from Nintendo, where they got weird. Even Dragon Quest kind of succumbed to this. Like Dragon Quest 2's innovations were, what if we had a party, and what if this game was like just significantly, appreciably more difficult?
Yeah.
Which were changes.
You got Castlevania
Zelda
2,
weird.
Zelda 2.
Castlevania 2 is weird. Mario 2 on the Famicom Disk System. It's a very strange game. So you Fire Emblem Gaiden, really weird game. So
But it's
there was this like iteration step that a lot of these franchises had, and then like the third game usually wound up being like the return to form. It was like the first entry but better kind of thing. So when you take those kind of broad strokes and then situate Final Fantasy II as a game that came out in December 1988 after Dragon Quest III, which was this kind of return to form for that series and was like held up as one of the best in that entire franchise. And then Final Fantasy II comes out, and then you play it, especially in its original incarnation, like 30 years later, and it's a really unfriendly game to go back to for a lot of reasons.
Boy, howdy.
Yeah. So I first encountered it in 2004 on the GBA port, which was itself a conversion of the WonderSwan port, which was based in part on the PlayStation conversion. No, I'm trying to remember. I think the WonderSwan version came and then the PlayStation one. So yeah, it was like 2000. So depending on what version of this game you've played, you get a very different set of math. But the original version of the underlying math of this game is just straight up busted. Like, numerous things just do not work as they're supposed to, or just lie to you. It's a pretty messy game.
Bugs?
There's a lot of bugs. Like, not like little, like, this menu item doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It's like, these spells
that
don't
should
work.
not be. Yeah, there are certain things in this game that should not be in here, which leads me to believe that either this is of an era where Q&A testing was not fully developed, or they just wanted to
strike. Yeah, strike while the iron's hot. They had a hit.
Yeah, they needed to ship that
Hot
thing
cakes.
by the end of the year.
But I think what is getting me most of all about this game is it's not just that it is a bad game.
Well,
it is unlike anything. It is unlike the previous game, and it is also unlike anything within its genre. Like, they decided to just tear everything down and make something from the ground up, which, to the game's benefit, means that they've taken a lot of that kind of plagiaristic Dungeons and Dragons style of approach of Final Fantasy I. But the result is them making this RPG game from the ground up means that this is basically their first attempt at a true Final Fantasy game, and that's a problem.
Some hits, some misses.
There's more misses than hits, I would argue.
But just a summary here, it came out on December 17th, 1988, in Japan, I believe, at first. It's been re-released for the WonderSwan Color, the PlayStation, the PSP, the Game Boy Advance, and the iPhone. Originally came out on the Famicom. It stars Furion and his buddies, Guy, Maria, and empty roster spot that changes throughout the course of the game, as they take on an evil emperor who is trying to take over the world. And this is the first Final Fantasy game with named characters. It's the first.
You can
Final
still
Fantasy
rename
game.
your characters, though.
Yeah, but it's the first Final Fantasy game where the characters have personality. They're not just nameless ciphers that you give classes and they don't have any relationships. You know, the main characters in one don't have any dialogue because it doesn't matter because they're just avatars. This game, the characters, it's very light, but they have characterization.
That's the nicest thing.
They had a very small canvas to paint on, but they painted something.
Yes.
Now, I had fun renaming my characters. So Furion is his name, right?
Yes.
Yes.
In all caps, his name is Why Me? Maria. I for some reason forgot to space this. Her name in all caps with no space is Oh God. And then Guy, his name is No.
Excellent. And then your fourth character, Minwoo.
Yeah.
I
will say that if we want to say some positives before I just completely dump on this game.
Before we do that, can we just... What versions is everyone playing? So I'm playing on the
we need to talk about this.
PS1 version.
I am playing on the PS1 version on the Vita. I've also played a little bit of the GBA version.
ZP, which version are you playing?
It depends on which day we're talking about, because...
Well, surely you played a bad version and then played a good version. So what versions have you played?
I've played the NES version, and I've remained committed to that for...
What language?
So, before we talk about some mistakes that I made in being a participant in this
No, you
game,
just say English, right? That's what you say?
So there's no actual version. So I wanted to play this game as God intended it. Quazu,
Did God intend this game?
Gotta respect his creative vision. I wanted to play the NES version, but lo and behold, for some mysterious reason, this game never came out in the United States. It's almost like they knew they couldn't. So I had to find a ROM, and so I booted up good old RetroArch.
You went to the Super Potato and you found.
So I went to a website that said, "Hey, we've got the ROM for the original Japanese version of the game. Boot it up. It's in hiragana." And it's like, oh man, this is going to be a weird experience.
That's cool because you speak, you read Japanese, right? It's totally fine for you, right?
Nah,
I
can read basic words, and if we're being honest, I can kind of read katakana, but this game is in hiragana, and that's a problem. So I would say I played this game just by reading a guide.
Just by sense of smell.
And sense of smell. Just to give you an idea about how stubborn I am about this, do you remember the original Pokemon game?
Yeah.
Do you remember that there's a cave where you need to use, like, flashlight in order to make the dark cave bright?
You don't need to use it, but it
really
I don't.
Helps. I played that entire cave with using graph paper and a copy of Nintendo Power, and I memorized the floor plan of that dungeon and completed that entire dungeon with just a completely black screen, just because I wanted to.
Okay, so how far did you get in the NES version in Japanese?
In the NES, well, the untranslated NES version, I got about an hour and a half, and that was about 3 days ago. So about a solid day's worth of progress. And then I realized, oh man, I can't. What's this spell? I forgot what these. Ooh, boy, who's this character? Oh wait, I have to click the piece of dialogue for the dialogue system, and I keep forgetting to do that. And so I've walked all the way to this person, and now I can't say the key word. So that was an entire day's worth of hard work that went down the drain. So eventually I found myself. Now, to my defense, I want to just preface this. Square Enix has never released the original NES version, the original version of this game, translated. It's never happened. Which, again, for the sake of game preservation, is a problem, for me at least. I mean, you want to think about how... So 2 wasn't translated, 3 wasn't translated, 4... What? No, 4 yes, and then 5 no. So there's this entire kind of weird period where they only oscillated every so-and-so game. So I then find a fan translation of this game, and boy howdy, it is the... Let me check what this fan translation is. It is a fan translation from 1998.
Great year.
Mm-hmm.
Great year to be translating games when, accountability of translations and fan dubs was at an all-time high.
Ocarina of Time, Half-Life, and Final Fantasy II fan translation. These were the releases in 1998.
And it's been poor.
I'm actually going to do a little homework here while we're on this topic.
Poor. it has been a bad experience. And to make it even better, all of the names of the spells are different. So Basuna is translated as peep, P-E-E-P, peep. I don't know why. So whenever I says the guide, hey, remember to use Basuna, not Esuna. Oh, Esuna is translated as heal. What's another good one? Oh, protect is called shell.
That's bad because shell is a different spell.
Well, shell is referred to as, I forget what it is called, like something else. Like all these spells don't everything's bad. Everything is very. This is a poor fan translation. And on top of that, on top of that, I am playing the NES version of this game, and that version is especially raw.
So 2 questions. One, I guess in sort of ascending order of importance, is this the Demi-Force translation that you've got in front of you? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of inappropriate humor for the dialogue.
A classic
there are multiple
hallmark
times
of
in which a
old
guy
band
remembers.
translations.
Yeah. What was that? I didn't hear that.
I said a classic hallmark of old fan translations is some self-insert potty humor.
Yeah, there's poop and fart jokes. There's a scene where a character uses the term, quote, a spoony bard, because they thought that was really funny in 4.
Awesome.
Yeah. There's times where the characters are supposed to be fairly serious, and then, of course, it's like, aw, shucks, rather than, oh, my God.
Okay, so, Jeff, what was the second question?
Second question is, I'm broadly in agreement with you on the, it's a shame that this didn't come out on the North American NES in the contemporary period, roughly. So I think if you go back and listen to the Final Fantasy I podcast, we talk a little bit about the weird North American release schedule of this game, because the short version, it came out in 1990, which was like 3 years after it came out in Japan for Final Fantasy I.
I can only imagine that this would have been a pain in the ass to translate, because there is a lot of dialogue.
But I guess my question to you is, so the Wonder Swan conversion basically preserves the game more or less as it originally came out, just with bumped up art. The PlayStation 1 conversion of the Wonder Swan conversion basically preserves all of the original math, just fixes bugs, and has an official translation.
And has
so my question to
cutscenes.
you is, why the hell did you not? And I'll go one further. You don't even have to pirate it. They'll just sell you a copy for $10 on the PlayStation Store if you wanted to play Final Fantasy II.
Let me cut you off right there.
Okay.
You don't need an answer. There is no good answer.
I know.
There isn't one. ZP, he's going to
I'm
lie.
Floating it.
If he gives you an answer, he's lying. There's no good reason.
But no.
Well, you don't have a PlayStation.
I want to respond to this. I played the original NES version of Final Fantasy I for a hot minute to just realize, oh man, the pace of this is shit. I don't want to play this. I want to play the GBA version. And let me tell you, what's the number one complaint on the blog series for that? You should have at least played the NES version for a little bit longer, or the original version, because they've changed everything in the GBA release, and it's almost a completely different game.
They did.
Yeah, they made it a good game.
So I decided.
They made it an easier game. Good.
I owe my fans penance. I owe them. So I am going to be a champion, and I'm going to play the rawest version of Final Fantasy II for them, for their entertainment.
All right.
For their pleasure.
The answer is
fans
you're dying
like
for their
that,
sin.
who needs detractors?
Exactly. You're dying for their sins. Excellent. So, Final Fantasy II. Let's start rolling on this game. So,
yes.
Start out. Furion, Guy, Maria, and Leon are being chased by knights of Palamecia.
Right, Leon.
Mm-hmm.
Dark Knights. You get into a fight at the very beginning
Gino,
of the game.
remember when Palamecia was an airship in Final Fantasy 13? Your favorite game ever.
Yep. So you're getting chased by Dark Knights, and your characters get attacked. You lose immediately, and you wake up in a strange town, be called
Altair?
Nope, that's not it. Altair.
Altair.
Yeah, it is not the character from the original Assassin's Creed, I don't think.
Hey.
But maybe.
I want to just say that in terms of first introductions, I thought that the introduction of this game was spot on. I thought it was great. The fact that it's a forced loss battle with a lot of flashy it introduces, one, an improved soundtrack, which sounds better. Two, visually it is better. And three, it shows that they've put in some effort to kind of graft a story to what was previously this kind of gameplay-only RPG game.
Yeah, and so, I think that taking on the role of 4 kind of young folk escaping from a city that's being sacked, it's an interesting way to start a game. And you wake up in kind of a resistance base in Altair or Altair, and you're basically, you go from there. You can go into a few different rooms. You talk to Hilda, who is the leader of the rebellion, called Wild Rose. She tells you which is their secret, like, code word, which brings us to the first big mechanic of this game. There's a dialogue system, kind of, in this game.
Yeah.
You can memorize different key terms and present certain key items to characters, and if they have some sort of action to respond to that term or to that item, they'll kind of give you more information, and you can have small, short discussions with them about these key terms. And that's generally how the game progresses. Like, you'll learn a key term, you'll talk to the people who it would be relevant to say that key term to. Some of them will sometimes respond to you with another key term you haven't heard before. You learn that key term, and you use that to advance the dialogue a little bit further, and on and on and so on and so on. And so...
So, I guess I'm going to be an asshole, and I apologize, but does that make Final Fantasy II a Metroidvania?
Fuck off.
Because essentially you've got a map, an open map that you get to explore that is unlocked by discovering, like, increasingly bespoke and arcane sorts of keys. In this case, key items or words that are used to unlock content that you need in order to finish the game. And you're increasing in skill level as you go by finding new equipment.
So the only reason I'd say no is because all of the terms and items, there's no way to jump sequence or kind of explore and make decisions as you will. You have to go in the linear order, otherwise the terms don't work.
That's an important distinction, I guess, and that I'm not seriously going to make this argument. The keyword as key item system sort of thing is interesting. It's not something they really went back to at any point.
No. This is the only Final Fantasy game that behaves this way.
It's cool, and I don't want to discount this because I think for a lot of people this was potentially the first time they had a system like that where you were kind of expected, even though it's done mechanically in the game, to memorize, keywords to navigate some, like, very light conversation systems with people. There's just the proviso that you're talking to ZP and me, so I have to say, and if you've never played, like, a CRPG, it was probably the first time you saw it. And I don't want to discount that, because I think for a lot of people, that was the case. But Final Fantasy, Ultima 4 was doing this, 2 years
Ultima
prior.
4
I think
is
Ultima
also
3 may have had this. It becomes when you examine the whole history of the medium, which is a weird thing we're in a privilege of being able to do. It's a little bit less impressive. It's worth noting that I don't even think it was the first time it'd really been done on the Famicoms. You've got stuff like the Portopia adventure games and stuff that were fiddling around with it. But it's interesting. It's a system. It's something in this game that you kind of looked at oh yeah, it was the one with the weird, they ask you to memorize Wild Rose right off the bat.
Yeah. Ultima 4 was 85. And again, what's cool about Ultima 4, The Quest for the Avatar, is it's among the few games in general that, and it's probably the first where the story doesn't center on you defeating an ultimate evil, and instead your quest is to prove that you truly are an avatar of virtue. That's why it's called Quest of the Avatar. And so you have to select the correct dialogue choices or perform the correct tasks that show that you're either honest or compassionate or you have humility and honor. And that's interesting. I would say that this dialogue system is interesting on paper, but it is very limited. And oftentimes these terms are only used for these fetch quests. And that's what I would lament, is that they have this interesting concept and it is merely an extra added step to retrieve this, go to here, initiate this quest line, rather than discovering more about the world.
Yeah,
Or
I would say most of the early vocab words you memorize can be used to flesh out the world, and generally when you're just starting, they give you more opportunities to talk to people. And as the game winds on, the terms get more and more specific, and you kind of know what you're doing, and they just become like, you need to say this term to this person so that they give you the thing, because there's only one person who knows what the hell this password means, or like dragoons, only like 3 people in the world give a shit about dragoons, so saying dragoons to most people will just give you a question mark.
Sure, and that's just it. Like, there's a lot of lost opportunity there, I think, where they could have, like, if you walk up to a random villager in town and ask them about Dreadnought, and they could have been like, oh, I'm like, that's the ship that the Empire built, or like whatever.
It blew up our home. Yeah,
like, you just... It literally any sort of flavor text, and instead you get a question mark. And the obvious reason for that is they were dealing with like kilobytes of like ROM to write this game to, like just a shocking lack of like memory to put text in. So it makes sense.
At the same time,
which begs the question, like, you had a PlayStation disc to fill up, and you could have just written kind of any flavor text and given it to NPCs, and they still left the question mark. Like, I think it's a real lost opportunity.
There were games at the time where you could just do dialogue trees, and I feel like that was already presenting itself as a vastly superior option than find the highlighted text and click it, and then say that word to the person who's just said it, and say it one more time. Like, that's the one thing that I'll say is, like, basically these words are only usable to, like, 2 people. And then once you've said it to those people, it might as well not exist anymore. And
yeah, a lot of them function that way.
And let me tell you, if you go through a dialogue sequence and you forget to click that word, like that,
memorize,
you've got to go through that entire thing all over again.
Yeah, but to be fair, doing it all over again is like talking to them once. It's not like a long thing, but this, I think what we're getting to is that the dialogue system is novel. It is the only game in the series that has this.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea that they were gleaning from other RPGs of the time. It's not implemented as well as some of them, but its presence is remarkable in that it should be remarked on. Like, it makes this game stand out in a way.
I don't deny that.
Yeah.
I don't deny that. Now,
just as a pedantic point, Ultima 3 was released on the Famicom in Japan in October 1987. Ultima 4 came out in 1990. But there was an Ultima game already on the damn system by the time Final Fantasy 2 came out. Actually, by the time Final Fantasy 1 came out. This is a pedantic point. Moving on.
No,
now, you explore the town. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's all I wanted to say was I think it stands out in the series, but it is not very good. It is not very well implemented. I think that it has its best moments in the first 1 or 2 times you use it, and then it gets worse and worse every time because you get more and more terms, you get more and more key items, and anytime you do not know which term or key item, or if you're missing one, and that's why you can't progress, every time you hit one of those roadblocks, it's miserable.
I mean, this is jumping ahead maybe 5 steps, but at least with the key words, they don't permanently take up inventory slots that you can use to put anything else. It's their own separate list. And in that sense, maybe they should have just done that for everything, because Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that would have been great.
So, speaking of the inventory system, here's the first major problem I have. So it looks and presents itself when you're in the town of Altair, it presents itself very similarly to Final Fantasy 1. And so me just jumping into this game for the first time, oh, it's the town. Oh, look, it's a store that has the same magic shop symbol, the same sword symbol, the same armor symbol. So your first reaction might be to treat this game very similarly to how you treated Final Fantasy 1. So you go to the store, you pick up a knife, you pick up a staff, you pick up some armor, you buy some spells, and then you equip those spells and you equip this stuff. And then you jump into the game and you try and play it having equipped this, and then your characters don't do anything, or they're missing every single time, or these spells, how do I equip these spells? How do I use these spells? No, you have to click the spell from an item and then click that spell to the person you want to give it to, but who's the white mage? Who's the black mage? Who's the red mage? Because this game isn't about those hardline job classes.
It's not about
you really
classes
don't know. You really don't know. It's like, eventually I got to the idea to where, oh, Maria is clearly the black mage. Guy is clearly this pseudo-paladin kind of DPS plus healer. And clearly the protagonist, Firion, is kind of like this red mage where jack of all trades, master of none. But you're in this game, the hour one, you got no idea. And it just leaves you cold.
To be fair, those distinctions are what you've made those characters into. They have slight preferences in terms of their starting stats, but the way this game works and the leveling works is, again, unique among Final Fantasy games. Nothing used this system again. Jeff, do you want to break down how this system actually functions? How you level these characters? Or I can take a stab at it.
Yeah, so I'm going to give this a crack.
This is the best case scenario, ignoring the fact that some of these concepts are totally busted.
Yeah. So, and it's to contextualize this, I guess, a little bit, as I mentioned, like, I played this game originally, 14, 15 years ago on the GBA port. And even then, like, there was a mystique around Final Fantasy II. Hold on just a sec. Where it was like, okay, so this has been fan translated, so people have poked around with it, and it's the weird one. There's a lot of strange mechanics in this game. So, like, even poking around on the internet 15 years ago, it was like, you're probably going to need a guide. So, right off the jump, when we were like, we're going to probably play this game for this podcast, it was like, okay, I'm just opening a guide and figuring this out.
Yes, I used a guide the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I went wrong.
You could, and people 30 years ago in Japan absolutely did get through this entire game without assistance. Like, it's doable. You can do it. You don't have to play this game in a hyper-optimized manner to have a good time, as I will probably demonstrate when I talk about my playtimes and stuff. But having said that, so you start with a party of basically 3 characters, and each one of them has got some inherent skill numbers, or trait numbers, their strength scores and that sort of thing. And they kind of, right off the bat, are pointing you in some directions that each one of those characters could go, that they're kind of optimized for just right out of the gate. Strength determines your attack stuff, intelligence determines your magic stuff, spirit determines your white mage stuff, and so on and so forth. And each one of those characters is kind of built in such a way. So the, like, quasi-canonical way to build this game is have Therion be sort of a fighter, have the female protagonist, whose name has just gone from my brain. Sorry? Maria. Sorry, there's a cat yelling in my ear. Shush. Have her be sort of a black mage and have Guy be sort of a white mage, like a priest character, which is just the way I went. So, as you do stuff in this game, traits and skills for individual things you're doing increase. It does the Elder Scrolls thing.
Yeah, that's the closest analog. The Elder Scrolls, if you do a thing, you get better at it system.
But more particularly Oblivion, which was the game where you most needed to just do a bunch of stuff in order to level up. The more times you use it, the more you level it up, or quicker you level it up.
And it's even fiddlier than that for a couple of reasons, because there are scores that modify other scores in very direct and then indirect ways. There is equipment that modifies scores to basically help you buff and debuff things as you increase and, like, progress through the game. And here's, like, the really, like, insane part. So let's say you are a a cleric sort of character and you cast white magic like almost exclusively, that will slowly decrease your strength and wind up actually decreasing your intelligence at a point as well.
Yes, you will atrophy other stuff.
Yeah, which is, again, one of those kind of cool things. Like, I think there are a handful of ideas in this game that are like, that's, like, interesting. There are, like, consequences for how you build stuff.
Now, the flip side to that is
flip side.
You're someone like me. You don't know what you're doing. You're trying to approach this game for the first time blind, and you end up atrophying a lot of characters to where they can't do things that you need them to do right now, or they're built inefficiently or poorly. And there's no good way to tell that until it's too late.
Unless you literally have guides.gamecorner.net/Final Fantasy II open on your phone the whole time you play this game.
Yeah, and I would say the most...
It's a good one, by the way.
Yeah, like the most straightforward way to play this game, if you had come to it playing other JRPGs where you just kind of go into battles, you fight whoever you need to fight, and then you hope that you level up. That's not how this game works. Like,
there's no levels.
There's not an experience
that's the
system
novel thing,
in this
there's
game.
no real levels.
Like, you do not... Yeah. You're not like, oh, I'm only like 20 experience away from turning level 7, and then I get this thing. Like, that is not...
No.
Like, none of that applies.
Your strength will go up when you deal damage to opponents, but your health will not go up unless you take damage. Same thing with your defense, your endurance stat. So in order to increase those, you need enemies to deal you damage, but if you kill them too quickly, they won't hit you, so your characters won't increase in HP and endurance. If you don't cast spells, you won't get better at spell casting. Your intelligence stats, your MP will stay super low. If you don't use a weapon enough, you won't be able to even hit enemies with it, which is what you were saying earlier, ZP. Like, when you first give someone a weapon, they won't know how to use it, which is kind of cool in concept, but it's kind of a bummer when half of your attacks miss, and then you basically are super ineffective with new weapons, even if the stats are much better than the weapon you already had, because as you use a weapon, you get more skill in that weapon class. And skill in that weapon class makes you more accurate with that weapon. It gives you more hits per attack, and each hit per attack will deal an additional instance of damage. So if you have like level 5 swords, you might hit 3 to 4 times per sword attack. If you have level 1 staves, you will miss almost all the time, and even if you hit, you'll only do 1 hit. So that consideration means that your characters tend to get funneled into certain weapon classes that they're dominant in, and you kind of always want to give them that weapon because getting more levels is it's not just like additive in power, it's almost multiplicative in power.
Yeah.
Like, it makes you more accurate, it makes you deal more damage, it makes you more consistent, all of these things just stack on each other, and it leads to like weird play patterns. Like in the beginning of the game, I think the best way to make your characters functional is to have them punch themselves in the face for the first maybe like a half hour. If you just have them attack themselves and then heal themselves so that they get enough MP so that they can heal, and then they get enough health and defense so that enemies don't just immediately kill them, and that also levels up their strength. So they get to maximize the amount of stat increases that they get because they're attacking themselves.
So, two things off there. Yeah, so you've touched on the thing. If Final Fantasy II is known for like one thing outside of being the weird one, it's you just punch yourself. Is that the game where you're punching yourself? But you spend a lot of time punching yourself. And yeah, you know what? For the first hour, it actually is kind of a viable strategy. And to talk about, as I think the only person in this group that's beaten the whole thing at this point, we'll talk about it. It winds up being the thing you'll do for the entire game, but only because effectively when you're, it's a classic Final Fantasy game, so you have 4 characters and you get to attack or use a spell with each one of them. There's not like a default option. Like, you can't just be like, I just punt. Like, there's nothing I could do here about an MP. I have like a stick, like my physical attack's worth nothing. It won't hurt this character. You can't not do something. So it's like there are occasions where you'll get to like, okay, well, the most optimized strategy I have right here is to like cast this spell, hit this dude, and then I get to Guy or whatever, and it's like, I got nothing. I guess Guy's gonna hit Birion on this turn, just so, because like I can't just punt.
Yeah, there's no wait or just guard button.
Or defend, yeah.
Yeah, like that would be a thing that I was like desperately pleading for was a defend. So that's, I guess, point one. I guess if you guys want to elaborate on that a little bit.
I think just the lack of a guard and the fact that your spells don't level up unless you use them, it means that you, like, for spells specifically, since the effects are so disparate and sometimes they're so critical, if you want them to be useful in battles, you need to just spam them. You need to just keep using them until you level them up. And that makes it so that, and each spell can have levels 1 to like 10.
16.
So, 16? Great.
Yeah.
So they can have like 1 to 16. And the higher level, the level that you want to attain, the more experience or uses you need to use to get that spell to level up. And so if you want those spells to level up, you need to use them, which means you have to grind battles. You just have to keep casting spells that don't do anything until eventually they will. And in some cases, like Esuna, which cures negative status effects, it doesn't cure
anything
early on. It just cures like poison and blind when you first get it, and until you level it up, that's all it will ever cure. If you level it up, it'll cure every negative status effect in the game. But the only way to get it to level up is to have your characters afflicted with a negative status effect and then cure it. So that means maybe you need to afflict your own characters with blind because enemies won't afflict you with negative status effects enough to level these skills up. There's a million ways you can just dump time into this game to optimize your characters. Yeah. And it's another kind of bummer is the other output you get from battles is money. And I would say after a few hours of playing Final Fantasy II, money is almost useless outside of buying ethers and elixirs.
Yep.
At a certain point, you've maxed out your characters on their spells. You've gotten all the best armor that you can buy. Not the best armor in the game, just the best armor you can buy. And then you just stack money to the ceiling. But if you're playing the PS1 or NES versions of the game, your inventory is 64 slots long. And, like, equipment and key
there's
items.
There's a delete inventory things on the 64th slot. 63. You'll count all of them, damn it.
And
I know, it's
key
the
items,
worst.
And the key items take up like 10 of those slots, so you've only got like 53 slots. And that also includes like your single-use combat items, your equipment.
And let's talk about how items don't stack. So if you buy 5 potions,
that's what I'm saying. If you have elixirs, like even if you got a ton of money and you wanted to buy 99 elixirs, you can't. And that means that at a certain point, you've got all the items you need. You can't spend your money. There's nothing to do with it.
Yeah, it's almost as meaningless as like the weird Ultima like buy hit point sort of insane systems they had.
But at least it's weird because like in the early game, you're cash strapped and you can't afford any of the useful necessary spells like life, like bringing your characters back, like teleporting out of dungeons because some dungeons don't have exits. And then after, I'd say, like, 2 or 3 dungeons in, money is trivial and useless. It goes from unplayable because you can't buy anything to unplayable because you can buy everything and nothing matters.
Right. So I guess the other mechanical thing I want to talk about at this point is the actual stats themselves, specifically a thing that Jeff did as a social experiment, like the Joker, which, fuck that movie. I guess. So the math in this game, right? Like, it's an RPG. RPGs are basically just these weird excuses to like tell stories while you do math.
Yes, and that's true.
In Final Fantasy II, the name of the game basically is going to be agility. So in my reading, when I was just like, okay, like I want to have the best time possible with this game, like show me some optimized stuff. Agility is really important.
How do you level up agility?
Leveling up agility is really important, it turns out. Mostly. So what is agility? Agility is your character's ability to dodge attacks. So the way these classic Final Fantasy games work, where basically you, instead of like, I guess the Final Fantasy 13 version of the future where it's like you're just hitting people for like 12 glass fillion damage in a sword swing or whatever, you would just slowly accumulate the ability to hit things multiple times. So Final Fantasy 1, it was a big deal when like your monk got their second attack. So like each time you hit attack, you would get basically 2 hits on a character. It becomes this force multiplier basically. And in Final Fantasy 2, I think in 1 as well, that sort of applied to defense as well. So agility is your ability to dodge attacks. How do you do that? You do that by leveling up your agility score by dodging attacks. Well, how do you do that? Well, having a good evasion score helps boost that. It like increases your odds of dodging an attack on an individual turn. Well, how do you do that? Well, it turns out shields help you do that. Shields put a nice flat boost per shield on the amount of evasion percentage that you have, so your chance to evade any individual hit. So I did an experiment, and I can go back and look at my individual saves and talk about this math at some point. But basically, I had Firion be just like a sword and board fighter the whole game. All he did was level swords. He was my utility spell mule, and he always had a shield. And long story short, he wound up with just a freaking ridiculous agility score by the end of the game, such that he was like just shrugged, like maybe a third of the time things weren't even hitting him. Like it was not even funny. I had Maria wind up being like sort of a frontline mage with just light armor and no shield and unarmed the entire game. And that wound up being like pretty much viable the whole way through. Guy, I gave him basically all the heavy armor and no shield, and basically had him sit in the front line and just tank hits for the entire game. So he wound up with a very low agility score, but a very high stamina score, which is the other number you kind of want to build up, because what stamina does is every time you level stamina, it will increase the amount of hit points you gain when you gain hit points, which also happens randomly. So
I thought hit points were when you take damage, you will level up hit points.
So when you take a bunch of damage, you'll start leveling up your hit points. But what determines the number that you gain when you do gain them is your stamina score. So if you get hit, if you get pounded on over and over again, your stamina will go up. And then every time you do gain hit points, you'll gain a shit ton of hit points. So he was like agility 0, but he had like thousands and thousands of hit points by the end of the game. So he just tanked everything, or he just took it on the nose basically and kept going. And he was my white mage, so his spirit magic was really high. So like I tried 3 weird strats, and for the most part all of them kind of worked, but I'd say the most like survivable and viable character wound up being Firion, because he could just dodge shit. So if you want to have a good time with this game, shields. Like
I would also say, based on that conversation, like agility means you're taking less damage, which means your hit points and your stamina are lower, but you're getting hit less, so it kind of equals out. Or you can take it on the chin, get a bunch of HP and endurance and spirit, so you're taking less damage and you have more HP, so you're survivable too. So kind of all roads lead to survivability. There's just a bunch of ways to get there.
Yes.
And I think the important key difference with evasion is if you don't get hit at all, there's no chance of getting hit with a negative status effect.
Correct.
And that is like Final Fantasy 1.
I want to just say one thing.
Yes.
I want to just say one thing. So Jeff and Gino, to our dear listeners, they pointed out all of these attributes and things they can level up. The game doesn't explain any of this shit to you.
And it also doesn't show some of these things. Like,
right.
The shields, when you equip a shield, it doesn't even say your defense goes up. It doesn't say shit goes up, really. It doesn't tell you what's happening.
Here's the part that gets me, because, like, at this point, my dear friend Cal from HG 101 would say, well, if you looked in the manual, which, like, is kind of true for Final Fantasy. Like, the PlayStation version of this game has a manual and lays out some of this, but not in very great detail, such that you actually wouldn't know. Like, it's like, agility is useful for dodging attacks. It's like, oh, I should probably do that. It doesn't go, no, you don't understand. You want to fucking dodge attacks. Like, it's
some
real
of these times
important.
they hit you once and then you're just dead.
Like,
you're dead on the ground.
It's really important that you do this thing specifically. So yeah, I think even the manual, such that there is one, is actually not very good either. Like, so it's a total wash. You need a walkthrough.
I understood that the shield increased my evasion because I've played a video game before.
Sure.
or that it would increase my defense in some way. But the game literally, like, when you look at the menu, it doesn't show you the amount that it's increasing. Which
it
is
gives you a
malpractice.
percentage increase is what it does.
Yeah, it doesn't show you how much. Why is my buckler worse than my diamond shield? I don't know. When I equip a diamond shield, it looks the same on the UI as when I equip a buckler, even though this is probably better.
I'm going to be totally real with you guys. I never equipped shields.
I did on Furion also, and I didn't for all of the game because the other option is dual wielding, and dealing twice as much damage is pretty good.
At the end game, particularly, dual wielding has some really good implications, but we'll get there.
Yes. So that's kind of the big system stuff. This game has a lot of systems. Very few of them are explained well, and they are all counterintuitive if you just played a regular Final Fantasy. Like Final Fantasy 1. If you came from 1 and then played 2, many of these systems make no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're not explained to you in a coherent manner.
No, there's no tutorializing of any kind. And
I guess to maybe wrap this all the way back around to like the first 5 minutes of this podcast, that feeling specifically of like, there's too many systems, none of them are explained, and I feel like I'm an alien. Like I feel like I can't communicate with this thing. Like I'm just like throwing a hot dog down a hallway.
Yeah.
That's Kawazu. That's his whole thing. Like that's everything he did and continues to do. And I know this because I played Unlimited Saga and I wanted to fucking die. Sorry, can I swear on the show?
No, yes, you can swear on the show.
It's a bad game. And this, like, as much as I want to be like, I can kind of see the upsides of some of these ideas. And, like, I want to, I played through this whole game. I spent a lot of time with this game. I spent a lot of time with Unlimited Saga too. And, like, you see these little nuggets, and it's like, oh, there's an insane person's vision here. But then you're like, if the shield does a flat, blind, undisclosed increase to agility, which will be useful 40 hours from now, and we're not going to tell you why, and you have to walk around this map and be just lost, and it's, ugh.
Yeah.
We haven't even started talking about the dungeons, by the way, but we'll get there.
The good news is that at least in Final Fantasy II, 1, take deep breaths, Jeff, there's no slot machines. 2, you don't move your characters on like a board game, 2D flat thing. And they fixed some of the problems of Final Fantasy 1. You know, potions don't do percentage damage based off of a die roll, so they fixed that problem. That's good.
No, they just do a random amount of healing instead.
The second thing that they changed is that if you queue up an attack and the enemy dies, it doesn't go into nothingness. It carries over to the next enemy. So that's an improvement. The graphics are nicer.
Yes, there were meaningful improvements made. So let's start cooking. Let's start cooking on the story because we won't have to hit. There's not a lot here. It's pretty sparse, but there's more than in 1. So you start in Altair. You then learn about Wild Rose, which is your password, and you're told by Hilda, the leader of the rebel force, that you need to go to Finn, which is the town that your main characters are from and has been sacked, and she wants you to meet with an informant who's going to tell you about a weakness of Palmesia that you can strike to give the resistance a fighting chance. So she gives you Minwu, who is a white mage.
Yeah. And is the only guest character worth a damn.
He's the best guest character. He comes equipped with all of the best white magic, and it's all highly leveled, and he has a bunch of MP to start. He's a great teaching character, and he is the best character for just like leveling up your party by having them punch themselves in the face.
Right. Yeah, he's I think maybe the most important Ludo appropriate, ludically placed tutorial item in the entire game, in the sense that he lets you kind of experiment, because he's probably going to like just win fights for you for a while, and B, because he comes equipped with all these spells that you can test drive that are like reasonably well leveled, all of them. You could be like, oh, this would be useful to have. I know to buy this one based on how I think I'm going to play this game going forward. So yeah, he's mechanically, I think he's a good character.
Let's talk about some of the mistakes I made playing this game blind. One, I bought him equipment. I bought him a new staff. I bought him a new shield. I bought him stuff. I even bought him stuff. 2, I relied on him to be my healer, and as a result, I did not level up Guy as being a healer at all. Yep. So for 4 to 5 hours, I had no one with decent healing or curative spells at all. At all. And so I relied on Minwoo far longer as a crutch than I should have.
Yeah. I think in the Fire Emblem kind of parlance, he's like a trap character in that way. Like usually in a Fire Emblem game, when you start, you'll wind up with like some highly leveled, very like tanky guy on your squad who you'd be like, oh, this is great. I'm going to have him go out front, take all my damage for me. And that's not a viable strategy at a certain point, because you'll have not gotten levels on any of your other characters. And that is like all Fire Emblem is. So he's kind of that.
On top of that, because you have these guest characters, he's the only guest character who is not a liability, and you feel like you have to be doing babysitting with your moves, your healing spells, the way. And he's also the only guest character where you feel like you don't have to do a hard stop and grind and level and get to a respectable clip.
I think that there's at least one other guest character who is pretty strong when you get him, and we'll talk about him pretty shortly because we're going to rip through the story. But yes, Minwoo is definitely the most competent guest character, and he is immediately the best. And he is for the whole game. Like, he's the strongest guest character by far. And unfortunately, he is where you learn the hard lesson that eventually these characters will leave. So, interesting thing, you go to Finn with Minwoo. I think you go to Finn first, and you don't get.
No,
Minwoo
you go
yet.
to Getria, and then Finn.
You don't have to go to Gatreya.
But here's another problem that I have with Final Fantasy II. This world is big, spread out, and incredibly empty.
Incredibly empty, and the only way you know you're in the wrong place is enemies of higher levels spawn and wipe you immediately. Yeah. Like, there's no escaping from battles in this game that I found. You just get murdered.
It really does suck. Like, there's no, like, normally when I play these games, Gino, I feel like, especially, and this is the case with Final Fantasy I feel like I turned a corner. I feel like I've made a turn to where I now feel safe. I never felt that playing this game ever. From hour 1 to where I'm at now, I have always felt cash strapped. I've always felt, well, not cash strapped anymore, but I've always felt like there's something in the environment that can wipe me clean. My attacks don't hit. I have to rely on magic spells almost exclusively at this point because none of my physical attacks land. I feel like this game is designed in a way that is malicious. And the fact that everything is spread out so far means that you're going to interact with even more random encounters that have the possibility of wiping you out.
And this is kind of where we were getting at before, where there's a lot of vicious cycles in this game. If you find that your attacks aren't landing and you decide to lean on magic won't miss. So you build that crutch. But then you're not getting better with your weapons, which means your weapons become even less likely to hit as you fight stronger enemies, which further disincentivizes you from using those weapons. And so you've kind of leveled your characters into a spot where they're not going to be effective in physical combat unless you really spend time to catch them back up.
I don't know if I can do that anymore because I feel...
You need to go back to earlier levels.
I don't know if I want to do that anymore because I feel like this game, and we've mentioned this before, but I feel like Final Fantasy II is disrespectful of my time.
Oh, totally. Because, I've leveled – the only spell I've leveled beyond level 2 is Cure. That's it. Because the amount of time you need to spend leveling those spells, you just need to fight random battles and cast the spell, regardless of whether you want to actually kill things with it. Like, just need to do it. You need to go to the gym so that you can eventually use these spells when they matter.
I'm going to go ahead and out myself right now because it's pertinent to what you're saying precisely. I'm looking through this Vita for my final playtime for this game. I want to preface this by saying that I have a reasonably long commute, so I'm not proud of this number, and no one should do this. It says here 43 hours and 5 minutes. So
I've played this game for 24 hours, and I feel like my game state is at a point to where it is no longer viable. Like, I feel like I've hit a wall to where I've relied and leaned on magic spells for so long that my characters can't cut it anymore. And if I want to continue playing this game, I have to go back to square one, work with a bunch of evil hornets, and then re-level up my weapons. And I'm going to be honest with both of you, I don't know if I can do that anymore. I don't have it in me to do this anymore. Because I don't feel like the game has earned my patience. And I don't feel like this game has earned my respect. And it is incredibly disrespectful of my willingness to even just play it.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 20 hours in and I'm at the last dungeon. So,
I'm 24 hours and I'm stuck at the Coliseum.
Yeah, so I think that speaks to needing to have a guide in this game. Like, you can throw hours at it, and if you're not playing it with those
I want to preface that
outlined,
is game design malfeasance.
Oh, totally. It's terrible. This game has a lot of very poor design. It doesn't tutorialize you at all. It leads you down bad traps. The level design is terrible in a lot of spots, and we'll get to that. So let's keep moving here. So you go to Finn, you talk to a spy. If you talk to anyone who isn't the spy, and the spy looks like all the other characters, if you talk to literally any other, they look like knights, just kind of set up in the town. If you talk to any of them and they're not the spy, they say that you're a traitor, and then they fight you, and then they murder you because they are much stronger than your party at this point. Mm-hmm. So you need to find the right one. And then if you talk to them, you tell them Wild Rose, they'll let you into a pub. The pub gives you access to Scott, who is a king. I think he's the king of Finn or the prince of Finn. And he tells you, hey, I'm going to die, but tell my brother Gordon that I believe in him, and tell Hilda, like, we need to keep fighting. So you go back, you tell Hilda Scott's dead, you tell Gordon your brother's dead, and Gordon kind of sucks and mopes. Hilda says, okay, we need to press on, and what we need is mithril. Because mithril is this magical material that's going to let us make better weapons and better armor, and then we'll stand a chance against the Empire. Here's my white mage Minwu. He's going to help you out, and you need to go to a place called Salamand, I think.
Yeah.
And there you'll meet someone named Joseph, and he's a informant we have. He's going to tell you where the mithril is, and then come back with it. So you go. You have to walk to you can walk around Paloom and Poft, which are two coastal cities, or you can take a ferry from Paloom to Poft. When you get to Paloom, you also meet Sid, the first Sid in a Final Fantasy game, and he's got an airship, like all Sids have ever since. Like this is the game that decided there's a guy named Sid, and he is the science man.
Yeah.
He's the tech guy.
Quietly, this is also like the final, like, it's the one where you hit yourself, and the one that's weird, it's also the one that's like, it's a lot of the firsts for the series.
Yes.
So yeah, your first Sid, here you go.
Here's the first Sid, he's got an airship, and this is kind of canonical going forward. You can talk to him, you can actually rent out his airship, and he'll take you places, but at this point you won't be able to afford that. You can take a ferry from Paloom to Poft, and then from Poft you kind of have to walk to Salmond. When you get there, Joseph says, I don't trust you. You need to prove that you're good and that you're cool. So go to Semet Falls. A bunch of people I know have been kidnapped. Go there and free them, and then I will tell you where the mithril is. You go there, it's a dungeon, and this is kind of your first taste of the dungeon design in this game. Which I would say is monster closets level.
Yeah, let's talk about the doors that lead to monster closets, because they fucked me up a lot.
Yeah, okay. So almost every door in this game, I would say at least 90% of the doors in this game are just empty rooms, the same empty room, with an incredibly high encounter rate.
Yeah.
There's nothing in there, you just have to leave, and you'll usually encounter 1 to 2 battles in each room. Is a lot.
They make me so mad. Okay, the thing about like, when you say that, you're like, oh, well, that's not too bad. I mean, you just took one step in, right? Like, surely you just turn around and leave. No, you don't understand. You open the door, you go to an empty room, and it spawns you in the middle of it. By default, you are forced to take, like, 4 or 5 steps in this room now. Like, there's no way around it.
And the rate is very high.
Yeah. And 90% of the doors in every dungeon are this. This is the point where I am like, this is the worst game in the series. Like, it is, there is no point to this except to pad the game's length out and waste your time. Like, it is the least friendly, most abominable thing.
You can't save in the dungeon. So
You can't save in the dungeon.
Can't save in the dungeons.
And
I hate this so much. Like, look, you should be kind to yourself, okay? Like, we're all working under oppressive, interlocking systems of capitalism and all of this and whatever, and there's, like, fascists in power, whatever. When you have leisure time, you should, like, be nice to yourself. You should do things that are, like, relaxing and fun. I struggle to see a scenario where a game that is deliberately malicious and wastes your time like this is something that you could do to help you relax. Such that I think if you're going to play Final Fantasy II, if no other circumstance is going to make you use a guide, pull up goddamn dungeon maps and find where you need to go. Because these doors ruin the entire experience of this game. They're unforgivable.
It's worth mentioning, if you have maps, if you have a guide, these dungeons are very short. Like, if you know where you're going.
Yeah. Which isn't to say that they're short literally, because they make you long these ridiculous, like, longest possible vectors between 2 point sort of paths that if you have a run button is great. If you're playing the Famicom version, it's not so great. But yeah, you can just get through these dungeons in like 5 minutes if you just avoid all of the monster closets. But if you don't, and you go into the monster closets, it's the worst thing in the world, and you'll want to die.
So just use the guides. Like, as long as you don't go in the monster closets, this game is a completely passable, mediocre RPG. If you go into the monster closets, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, I completely disagree. Like I have said before, the fact that I have made the wrong choices with how I have leveled my characters, the fact that I have made the wrong choices in how I have built my characters, the game, every step that I take is a anxiety, sweat-inducing fear of, God, if it's just 2 fish, then fine, I can deal with it. But if it's 3 serpents plus 2 antlions, I am screwed. I can't do this. I've made it to the last step of this dungeon, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to have to do this all over again, and I'm going to lose everything that I worked on.
And it's worth mentioning, you can't boost your, like, as you're running out of MP, you can't boost your MP by healing on the menu. Healing on the menu will boost your spells level, but it will not boost your base stats. So you can basically heal yourself out of the ability to cast your healing spells, which is ridiculous. But yeah, there's a lot of bad design here. All I'm saying is if you have a guide and if you're looking at the maps, you can bypass the poor level design because you know where to go.
No, but the levels themselves are so poorly designed. The encounter rate is so high. The fact that you have to do these zigzagging nonsense, and the fact that, we'll talk about it later, but sometimes they deliberately design the dungeon to where you can't get out, heal at an inn, and so you have to do every part of the dungeon. Or they disable your ability to teleport out of the dungeon for no reason in particular other than you have to walk all the way back to the top.
Yep.
I'm sorry to say it again, but this is literally the meanest, most malicious game I've ever played. And
I think the dungeons are unforgivable and abominable. Like, I think they're, like, kind of beyond the pale.
And what's even worse is it does the same terrible mistake from Final Fantasy I, where once you are done beating a boss, if you don't have the exit spell, you got to walk all the way back. And for the first couple of times when you don't have Minwu with you and you didn't buy that spell, level it up, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You might as well just load up the save from when you saved in front of the dungeon.
Yeah. Here's the other fun thing. I guess we haven't talked about this specifically. So MP, right? You start this game, I think each character defaults to like 10 MP. To level up your hit points or your magic points, this applies to both, you basically need to get both of those numbers low. And then the game will just decide, this is the one that's like actually pretty random. They're like, oh yeah, your MP went up. and like it gets boost based on your
But
intelligence occasionally.
It's an RNG. So
It's
there
RNG.
were constant times where I brought my MP to half or below. The RNG said, I don't feel like it, which meant I then needed to go back to the inn, restore my MP, and maybe this time if I reduced it to half, I'll finally get an MP boost.
So, like, it leads to this, like, well, I guess I'm going to go down this floor of this dungeon and then turn around and heal and then come back because I didn't get a boost. Like, you do these, like, sorties, for lack of a better word. So that's A. B, ethers are pretty expensive from the jump. By the end of the game, you'll have the money. It's going to be okay. But
I don't want to waste the inventory slots on them.
C, Osmos comes like mid to late game, and that does alleviate a lot of the problems, but you need to level it up to be like more efficient. And when things run out of MP, you can't Osmos from them anymore. And here's like the real kicker. The spell scores, they go from 1 to 16. That number indicates how much MP it uses. So let's say you have an exit spell and it's level 1, and you stick it on Furion, a guy you're not going to do a lot of magic with. Eventually, that's going to turn into a level 2 spell if you keep using exit. And if you can't subsequently increase your MP at a reliable rate, which you can't because it's random, you can wind up in a scenario where it's like, okay, I need to cast exit. Like, I want to get the hell out of this dungeon. But I've got 1 MP on this character, and I have no means of adding more MP. I guess I'm going to have to trudge through this whole, oh, now I'm dead.
Yeah, I have one of my go-tos was my Black Mage because, again, I made a mistake. I admit that I made a mistake, that I was having such a miserable time getting my attacks to hit that I relied on magic. And unfortunately now, my best magic spells are all levels 6 to 7, which means I only have 10 or 12 times in which I can use magic now. I don't know what to do. I've fucked myself over, and I don't want to play this game anymore. That's just the frustration
the only thing
I'm
to
at.
do is keep spending MP and hope you get a boost. That's all you can do.
But when you're like in the bottom of the dungeon, that's not like advice.
That's not an
that's
option.
Like, why aren't you stabbing yourself more often? Like, it's like, I don't need to hear that. That's not useful.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So let's just tear through the story.
You fight a sergeant, you move on.
We've covered how much this game sucks to play, and I think with nuance.
I really, one of the reasons why I wanted to record this is like I want to continue to be a part of this. I want to continue to be a part of this, but if I don't figure out, like, I literally don't know what I did to my game to where I feel like I can't play this game anymore. I honestly can't play this game anymore.
I think we covered it. You leveled your characters into a spot where their skills aren't high enough to hit anything.
What skills am I looking for? Let me just pull up one of my characters. So
you just want to. Can we focus on the
sure.
going through, because we can do diagnosis off podcast. I'm pretty sure it's just that you need to keep banging away at enemies when you're next to an inn so that you can heal yourself if things go bad. But that's not a great answer, because all the answers in this game are bad answers. So in Salma, you go to Summit Falls, you rescue Joseph's daughter, and Paul, the master thief. He's a recurring character.
Yeah.
Then you go back to Altair, looks like.
Yeah. Then don't you go to Bofsk?
Oh yeah, you go to Bofsk with Joseph, right? He joins you.
Joseph joins you.
Yeah, that's where you have to get the mithril, and all the men have been enslaved into the sewers of Bofsk.
Yeah,
so before that, you need to go drop Minwu off because the king is dying.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
and
here's a
Joseph
fun fact: this is a point where every guide says take all the gear off Minwu right now, because he's going away.
Yeah.
Particularly if you bought him anything.
Yeah, I didn't read that part.
Yeah, because again, if it turns out if you quote unquote cheat, becomes a lot easier. But he goes away, takes all the gear with you. You don't get to keep it.
Yeah.
So
that was lame.
Joseph
I hated that.
Joins you. You prove your loyalty. Joseph joins you, and I think this is kind of the coolest story moment in maybe the whole game. He joins you. He's a barehanded fighter, which is cool.
Yeah.
He's the second competent character.
Yes.
I think he hits really hard. He hits way harder than your.
He's literally just cool.
Yeah. He's got a daughter. He's got a partner of some kind. It seems like.
Mm-hmm.
everyone in town talks about him, which is nice.
Yeah.
You go to Bosk. He knows this cave. He gets you a snowcraft that you can use.
It was at this point where like the world map stuff started really setting in for me too. It's like getting over there is such a pain in the ass. Like it's this long walk through the snowy valley.
Hill once you get the snowcraft and how long you have to drive that snowmobile.
Yeah, like it's a really long. Dragon Quest was doing this stuff too, to be fair, but like just getting over there, and it's like it has a point. It's to help you grind. Like that's the point. That's why they did it.
That's a bad point.
But yeah, it's like grinding is not, unless you're Billy Rothert or apparently me. Yeah, that's not the draw. So Anyway, you walk forever, and then it gives you a snowcraft, and it takes like generously half as long, which is still too long.
Yes. Don't you also go to Poff? You meet Bergen.
Poff, and what was the other town that's like Poff? It's like a coastal city that is near. It's not Bofsk. It's Poff and
Salmond.
No,
Paloom.
Paloom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
At some point, you meet Borgen and the Dark Knight, who's like the bad guy, Master General of the Empire. Joseph and you go to the bottom of this cave. You find Mithril that the Empire had. You beat Borgen, who's this traitor. He's like a pirate guy. As you're leaving, Borgen says, if you're going to beat me, the Empire's going to kill me. I can't let you live. And he drops a rock, and Joseph, like a giant Indiana Jones boulder, and Joseph sacrifices himself to hold the boulder up.
Yeah.
Which is cool. It's a cool moment.
Yeah.
You go back to his hometown. His daughter's like, I guess Daddy's never coming home. And his partner's like, I guess I'm going to have to run this city now that Joseph's gone. And that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's the first character that gets iced canonically.
Yeah. In all versions of this game, there are various attempts to create these cinematic cutscenes, and I loved each and every one of those. The better one is when we get into the Dreadnought, but they certainly put in the effort to try and make this a more cinematic experience.
Totally, and icing a character. This is, I think, the first time like a named character in a Final Fantasy game died.
Yes.
So this is the first time they use this trope, which is cool, remarkable again.
Mm-hmm.
You get access to Mithril armor, that boosts your attack and a whole bunch of stuff. But now the Dreadnought, this giant ship, rises up and starts just laying waste to the towns you've gone through. And if you go into these towns after the Dreadnought visits them, you'll see them all shot up, and all of the citizens will tell you about how this thing's fucked up. We need to take it out. And then you learn about the Dreadnought and how to defeat it. You talk to Sid, and he tells you that you need this object called Sunfire. The only way to get it is to go to this place called Kashwan Keep, and you need a specific lantern to hold the Sunfire so that you can blow this place up. And Gordon will know how to get into Kashwan Keep because that is where he and his brother Scott are from.
Yeah. So
and they can get in.
This is the first level when I realized there was something very wrong with how I had been playing the game. Because one, this environment is completely removed from any nearby inns, and should you not be able to complete it in one go, you're fucked. Two, Gordon is literally one of the worst characters in the game. He's a terrible companion. It's just, you feel like you have to play babysitter whenever he's a part of your party. And
he levels very quickly. He starts out terrible, and
you effectively have to start leveling a character from scratch, which is kind of a weird role reversal, I guess, because Minwu babysits you, and then if you babysit this guy, and oh wow, it's again a weird mechanical thing where it's almost it really makes you think, doesn't it? You know,
I do like that Gordon is canonically he's a coward.
Yes.
that is the thing about Gordon is that he's a weakling and a coward when you meet him, and I like that he starts out terrible. He starts out with no skill in almost anything. He has the fastest leveling rate of any of the characters, and by the time he leaves your party, he generally is pretty strong. So you actually get a little bit of the cinematic storytelling or I guess ludic storytelling. You see the character's development and their gameplay reflect their growth as a character, which in a game with very sparse cutscenes and very sparse story moments, I think works. For him, and but it also sucks. Like, you've got this character who's mostly non-functional, who's mostly there as a metaphor.
Yes, and also Kashuan Keep is the first level that pulls a note, my least favorite note from Final Fantasy I, which is the status effects.
Yep.
Yeah.
There are a lot
There's
of
bunch of zombies.
were-beasts and were-rats and all of these horrible status effect hitting monsters. The race, the ghouls, all of the shit from Final Fantasy I that gave me nightmares, they're back too.
And a bunch of the treasure chests are full of monsters that are several levels above you, and they will wipe your party members in a single hit.
Yep.
So this place sucks.
Another note about this general area, it was at this point in the game where it's like, for me personally, and like I got this far when I played the GBA version like 15 years ago, but I was like, oh my god, walking across this world sucks. It takes forever to get anywhere. It makes me want to die. And it's at this point that there's a little notch in a nearby woods to Kashuan Keep.
Yes.
And you go inside, and that's where you're introduced to
A chocobo.
the first chocobo.
The first chocobo. The only chocobo.
The only chocobo. It is one bird. It's in one spot, and it moves, to be fair, reasonably quick. But
And there's no random battles.
and
when
there's
you're
no
riding
random battles, which is oh my god, a mercy. It's interesting to note that basically I think someone actually play tested this, which ZP is going to dispute. And they were like, "Yo, Kawazu, yeah, whatever, your game's cool. Getting around this world sucks ass." And he's like,
getting back from this specific dungeon is miserable.
Like, this is a nightmare. What were you thinking? And he's like, and it's like, you sure you don't want to put fast travel in this game? He's like, no, not a chance. It's like, I know, a yellow bird, like a bird you ride. And I'll check this, a little song, like da 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 da. Just put it in the game. Just put it in. Like, the chocobo is basically this, like, yeah, we know our map sucks, so here's a way to get around it faster. But it's very contextual, and there's one of them.
There's only one of them.
Like,
why did they put them all over the place?
Yeah, it's
and a franchise was launched.
Yes,
why didn't they?
The Chocobo's Dungeon games were
God. You know what, Gino? I take back every mean thing I've said about Final Fantasy IX. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every mean thing. At least that game has like 5 different chocobo forests, and they're spread all out strategically. There's one for this one specific dungeon.
Yep.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
I think it's
and the
worth
loop
mentioning...
for the chocobo theme is like 2 seconds long. Like, you know, like you think of the first
worst.
bar of that
so
song.
bad.
That's
like
it. That's the
3
one
notes.
bar. Yep.
Yeah. Speaking of Final Fantasy IX, Joseph's story actually is told in Final Fantasy IX as like a parable of the past, which is kind of cool in a moment in that game.
Oh, shit.
This leads us... Sorry.
Yeah, so...
Yeah.
Oh, no, they give Joseph's story when you're getting Ramu for Garnet the first time. He tells you Joseph's story, basically, of sacrificing himself, and then he asks you to decide whether Joseph's sacrifice is, like, a worthwhile sacrifice or hubris or something. It's a cool callback. This game might have the most per capita callbacks in 9. It's close. So you get Kashuan Keep, you get the Sunfire, then you go back to Altair, stock up, and then you have to go to the Dreadnought, which is docked kind of to the north. You go to the Dreadnought, fight your way through it. You get to the center. You throw the Sunfire into the center. The Dark Knight's like, you might have destroyed the Dreadnought, but you haven't defeated the Empire. Yeah. We'll get you still. Booga, booga, booga.
I would say this is the level that broke me. When you guys saw on the Discord, like, me having this existential crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Dreadnought is the level that caused me to have that existential crisis. Like, oh my god, I don't know if I can do this. What have I done wrong?
Yeah, if you don't know the map, the Dreadnought's miserable. If you have the map, the Dreadnought's
I had the
pretty
map.
fast.
It was not that I had the map. It's the fact that there's this Dreadnought. I will say one thing. I like the fact that the way that the Empire gets its advantage over the Rebellion and the world around it is that it's literally employing monsters. And so whenever you go into these Imperial environments, these Imperial agents are able to walk through the environment, yet there are monsters there. I actually like that. I thought it was a nice little touch. Like,
and they have aerial superiority. They're like bomb people.
But, I mean, 2 things. One, I think I've reached the point to where I'm just going to stop getting the optional. Like the guide that I was using said, always remember to pick up every item in the map before continuing on to the next floor.
Yeah, that you throw that right out the fucking window.
I got to throw that out of the fucking door because one, there was a time where I opened a chest. I opened a chest and it had a potion in it, and then I had fucking 2 Pisco demons attack me. And then it's like, for a potion, you're going to attack me for this? And so I think it's time for me to just do what you two have been doing, which is just when you get into a dungeon, just go from one level to the next. Don't do all this fuddy-duddy business of trying to go down the optional route of picking up these swords because you don't need them, and they're probably going to hit less. And so
unless
the moment
they're like 2 or 3 really important swords, in which case if you don't get them, the game is fucked.
Wait, really?
There's a couple of like the blood. There's a couple of weapons that are really important, but we'll tell you. You haven't run into them yet.
Yeah, but so I would say what ended up just where you saw the peak of it in Discord was when I rescued Hilda and they locked the door behind me on the Dreadnought. I think I took a picture of where my health and my HP was. I promise this will be quick. Okay, so I was at half health across the board. My MP was 40 points and below. Gordon had 5. Blue guy had 17. And he was my only healer, and I had no potions. My Dark Mage was 34, and Firion had 43, but I forgot to equip him with spells. So I had to find a way to get out of this dungeon, or I had to find a way to move from floor 4 to the final floor, floor 6, basically with 8 black magic spells, 4 healing spells. This is how many times I had to replay this level over and over again. 4 healing spells and a couple of potions. And so I got to it to where I knew exactly the number of encounters I would have on floor 4, 5, and 6. And I had to save. I used every single one of my save slots, but I save scummed every step in every random encounter, including a save state where it was at the very beginning of the level where I still had the option of going to an inn. But being able to just go from one door to the next, I knew exactly how many encounters that I would have. And if it was against those weird cat demons that cast Paralyze, I would just hard reset and go back to my previous save. And so that's the position where I was in. And that's the position where if I want to progress through a level, I have to either hope and pray I can get through the first 2 or 3 without any difficulty, or just hope and pray that the random number goes. Basically, I have to hope and pray that Jesus loves me.
Yep. And once you get through the Dreadnought, you go back to Altair. Dreadnought's defeated. You learn about the last Wyvern. They're dragoons.
I love the story
Welcome
here.
to the dragoons.
I love the story here. I'm glad that the castle in which you're talking to this kid and this dragon, and there's no random encounters. So they knew that they had the ability to program environments with no random encounters. Yet they only follow up on that idea, follow up on that importance, maybe 2 levels. Like there's that random time where you're in the prison and there's no random encounters and you feel like you can just explore the environment. And then the very next level, you can't. It's full of fucking, like, hill gigases and fucking those weird things that suck up your MP, which if you've fallen into a trap where you're MP dependent, guess what? Those things suck.
Yeah. So I think it was about, I'm trying to find the actual like step-by-step walkthrough I used, and I'm actually finding that to be a challenge for some reason.
Oh, right. At this point, we get Layla.
Yes.
I forgot.
Oh, yeah.
Layla's actually pretty cool.
Layla, she's a pirate lady. She tries to jump you, and you mess up all of her pirates, and then she's like, okay, I'll join you. And that's how you get your ship.
It was about at this point, because it's definitely with Layla, because at this point you've got a ship, right?
Yeah, you get the ship from Layla, and then you go to Deist, and you learn about the dragoons.
Yeah. This is also the point, and this was a very important thing I wound up doing, where because you have a shit like at this point you've probably got money that you like have nothing to do with, and it's like the next town you're going to go to is have marginally better equipment, or you can just sail straight to Mysidia and walk there, which is a dangerous walk, and you're reliant on RNG to not kill you. But if you can get there, you can buy effectively some endgame armor and spells, including basically the nuke equivalent in this game, and Holy. And I think Osmos, like spells you will really, really come to rely on for like the back half of this game are available to you immediately. You just have to go through kind of a crappy walk. So I did that almost immediately after the Castle Deist stuff. And I would recommend you do that.
Yeah, I'll try. I will try. Yeah. I will find a way.
Especially if you're magic dependent.
And if you're save stating already.
Yeah, I'm literally save stating. The worst one came in the Coliseum, but we'll talk about it later.
Sure. But anyway, yeah, Deist,
I will say the one thing, even though I wish if you were on the boat there were no random encounters. I wish that there was one form of transportation that
it's just chocobos.
It's just the chocobo system. Everything else results in a random encounter. Like at least in Final Fantasy 1 when you had the airship, there were no random encounters when you were on the airship.
Well, that'll happen once you get an airship.
God damn it! I want it to happen now. But
I know, same.
And also, too, navigating this continent sucks.
Yeah.
This map sucks. Like you don't even have a clear idea that you need to go to Castle Deist.
Well, they tell you to go there, but like, where is it?
Where is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know it's on an island because they say it's on an island, but there are multiple islands in this game, so that's kind of a bummer. But once you find Castle Deist, you learned about the Dragoons. Apparently they went to war with the Empire. They had wind drakes, so they were able to fight the Empire on even footing, but then the Emperor poisoned the wind drake's water supply, causing all of them to die out except for one, but it is dying from the poison as well. You get a pendant of a Dragoon in the Cave of Deist nearby. This allows you to talk to the wind drake. Then it basically tells you, hey, here's an egg. Could you plant this in our breeding ground at the bottom of the cavern, and it will grow into a new wind drake. Please don't let me be the last wind drake. And then it dies, which is, like, again, this is the closest, way more storytelling than the original game ever had. You go down to the Deist Cavern, go to the bottom, drop off the egg, and then you're kind of done with that dungeon, though I think this one does not have a warp out. So this is the first dungeon where if you do not have warp or exit or whichever equivalent spell, you are going to have to schlep it back, which is a bummer.
And it
when
sucks.
you go back to Altair after Castle Deist, you learn that Hilda's been captured.
Well, you have to find out that there's a doppelganger Hilda.
You don't find that. Yeah, you find out that the Hilda that you took back from the Dreadnought was a doppelganger. You fight her. She's a Lamia queen. Then you go to the Colosseum. You fight a behemoth. You rescue the real Hilda. Gordon kind of leaves your party. He joins you to go to the Colosseum, and then he leaves as soon as you find Hilda.
Which means you have to truck out of the Colosseum with three characters, and that sucks.
Yeah,
it sucks. And that's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, our story. To be more specific, that is where I am. And just to tell you another situation where it was, is I was able to get out of the Colosseum. I got through the Colosseum very well, but I was spent. The thing that I was actually afraid of was the trek through the desert, because there were those weird-ass sand sharks.
Oh, yeah.
And
those
ant lions. They'll kill you.
Lions. Yeah. So I got, again, just to give you an idea about how fucked my situation is in this game, is I got it to where Maria had – the antlions were fine because the antlions are weak to ice. So I could just ice them and get them attacking and that sort of thing. But Maria had low MP to where I had maybe 8 spells. So I had 8 spells worth of ice magic to use. And so – I got it to where I positioned my character to where there were just I figured out a way to just have 2 encounters while walking over the sand. And I needed to find a situation where it would just be 2 to 3 ant lions And if it was the sand sharks, I would just hard reset. I would go back to my save state. Because I mean, I had characters that were low HP, and Firion couldn't use magic anymore, and his attacks were missing. Like, I hate to bring this up, but I'm in a situation to where my characters only land their attacks, their physical attacks, maybe 20 to 30% of the time, and
something is wrong.
Something is very wrong.
Yeah, like that sucks.
And
that's
here I pulled it up. My hit percentage rate is anywhere between 6 to 94%. So
what a great spread.
My spread is you will either have with an attack a 6% chance or a 94% chance. I don't know what I did to cause this to happen. I don't know what I did. I literally don't know what I did. If I could cry, I would.
Oh, that spread is okay. So let me break down that. Actually, what that actually means is it was 6 to 94. Is what you said?
Yes.
So what that actually means, I'm sad that I know this. So each time you hit attack and swing at an enemy, you're actually getting 6 swings, and each one of those swings should
hit 94%
have a 94% chance. Now,
I don't know why.
If you're only hitting 30% of the time, that's like, okay, let's throw this Famicom away. Something's wrong. Let's get rid of this.
I don't know.
Are you using?
But that's what that should
be. Using the ancient sword or the crescent?
Yes. Why?
So those have lower hit rates.
Huh?
They're cursed.
They're cursed.
They're cursed weapons. They hit way less often than regular weapons.
I didn't notice that.
Then I'm pretty sure that I ended up using like the Mithril Blade because I just got so tired of it.
Yeah, the Mithril Blade hits almost all the time, but the reason why you'd want to use the ancient sword or the crescent is the ancient sword afflicts curse if you hit your enemy, which lowers their defense significantly, and the crescent will afflict them with sleep, which makes them unable to take actions. So there's a couple of blades around this part that you get that have these status effects on them that offset a low hit rate with an incredibly high upside if you hit. So I think you just had a character who was equipped with multiple weapons that have a very low hit rate naturally. Sorry. Well, that's the sound we're going to have to leave Final Fantasy II's first podcast with. Exasperation.
I will take everything you two have said to heart. I will follow up. We'll see if we can unfuck this game.
It can't be unfucked. We can't unskew this poll.
Yeah.
Okay, let me rephrase this. We can salvage my playthrough to where I finish this game.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
We can rebuild you. We can make you stronger.
I've already done my time in hell, so I'm not replaying this thing.
That's a fair stance.
Because I want to say, I want to see the positive of this game. Like it's kind of like what Jeff has said. Like you can see the kernels of good ideas in this game, but they're just packaged in this insulting and disrespectful video game. Like to this date, especially with the NES game, and I realize you guys have said time and time again to play this game with a guide, but I cannot preface enough how disgusting it is that is the most viable way to play this game.
Yeah.
Like I cannot preface enough that this game might well be the most broken, unplayable, just straight up busted thing we've ever played on the Deep Listens podcast.
Yeah, there's like
it's one of them.
It just astounding bugs in the release version of this game.
Oh, we didn't even talk about some of the bugs. The reason why
we can talk about the bugs next podcast because we've covered enough.
I'm going to try.
Hated on this game enough
I
for
will
now.
promise you both, from the bottom of my heart, I will find a way to finish this game.
Okay, cool. So, listeners, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Send your
Final
emails.
Fantasy.
If you like Final Fantasy II, why?
Yeah, would love to hear you.
Final Fantasy Too Bad. You can send us feedback at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got
By the way,
comment
to preempt the jokes that we're going to get, Final Fantasy 2 for the fan. Don't tell us Final Fantasy 2 is a good SNES game.
Not Final Fantasy
like
4.
that's haha. Okay, we laughed at it. Moving on.
Yes, and you can send emails to deeplistens, deeplistenspod@gmail.com. Wait.
It's been a long time since you fucked that up, so I'm
because I have my rhythm, and then you broke my rhythm.
Apologies.
I don't have to think when I'm doing it. It's deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And you can support us on Patreon if you want. So thank you, ZP.
I don't know. Gino, I'm sorry that I picked this game.
I'm sorry too. Thank you, Jeff.
Love being on the show. Thanks for having me.
Great. And thank you, listeners. Until next time, peace.